Excuse me. Welcome. I'd like to go ahead and begin, and I'm glad to have this time with all of you. I don't know if others will be joining, but this is quite a group of chaverim right here. So let's begin, as we do each week, with a moment of blessing, of gratitude. Hoda'ah is going to be an important word for us today, for this time together and for this magnificent text that continues to challenge us and to provoke our interest and curiosity and hopefully our love. Join me, please. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. I feel so fortunate that we can be busy with Torah, because it's possible to be busy with so many other much less important things, and having this structure helps me to stay focused here. So thank you for that. Want to say gratitude to Clem and Harriet Sugarman. They are not able to join us today, but they are sponsoring this class, and sponsoring this class in honor of all of our learning together. So thank you to Clem and Harriet. And Audrey, I'm going to ask you to help me remember the Jewish Studies announcements at the end of our session. Okay. Parashat Vayetze. The journey continues. I have a lot of source material to look at with you today, and I'm going to do my best to distill it as elegantly as I possibly can, but I also want to give a preemptive statement of appreciation for your patience. So just to bring us up to date, we've now moved from the end of what unfolds in Parashat Toldot, where the blessing and deception has unfolded, and Jacob has been basically pushed out the door by his mother, hoping for his safety. He makes this incredible journey. He has his own moment, his first moment of theophany, of experiencing God's presence. This is the parasha this week where Jacob family says, Yesh Adonai b'makom hazeh. Shlomo's quoting it with me, Vanochi lo yadati. That's good. I'm feeling God is in this place and I didn't know it. And it's also the famous story of Jacob's dream of the ladder. A lot of big things happening here. And then, of course, to go back to what we were talking about last week about wells, it's in this parasha that Jacob meets Rachel at the well and has this moment of an expression of love that's almost as big as his theophany experience. He goes through this difficult story of working 7 years to win her hand in marriage, and then ends up marrying her older sister Leia, and then has to work another 7 years to be able to marry Rachel. And the part I want to look at with you today is later in the parasha, where Leia is able to overcome some of her own disappointments and sadness by succeeding to give birth to many children, and specifically to look at the names that she chooses for these children and what those names teach us about her, about this family, about our people, about Hebrew. Okay, so here's the source sheet. And before we get to, no, that's not what I want. Hold on just a second. Sorry, I need to put this in front of me. There. before we get to Parashat Vayetze, I want to just look with you at this passage from the beginning of Genesis. We're calling this week, if you can name it, you can tame it, which is a somewhat kind of popular psychology technique for overcoming our challenges by naming them. So there's importance of names and the name we give to things. So let's start first with this passage from the creation epic, which is the moment where Adam is names all of the other creatures. Vayikra ha'adam shemot lechol ha'behema ule'of hashamayim ulechol chayat hasadeh ule'adam lo matza ezer kenegdo. So it's in this moment that Adam is naming all these different creatures in the created world and noticing that the one creature that he needs as a partner hasn't yet been created. But this moment of naming everything turns out to be very important. And we won't go into it now, but there are comments from some of the Meforshim about the importance of his naming the rest of creation in order to establish his own sense of self in that tapestry of creation. Okay, so just keeping in mind just the theme of naming things, of giving a name to something in order to define it, in order to understand it, in order to create it on some level. Okay, so now here's the passage that is from this week's parasha. I think this will be familiar to you, but let's just go through it together. Vayara Adonai ki snu'a Leia vayiftach rachma v'Rachel akara. So opening this passage, God is paying attention. God sees that Leah is not beloved. She is snu'a, hated, it says. Vayiftach et rachma. So the implication is, as a kind of reward for her suffering, she is able to become pregnant. It literally says God opens her womb, and by extension, by the way, Rachel, who was so beloved, is not able to bear children. So Leah is lifted up above her beloved sister in this moment. Vatahar Leah vateled bain. She becomes pregnant and she gives birth to a son. Vatikra shemo Reuven. So just look at this in the Hebrew for a minute. Even if your Hebrew doesn't feel super professional, just look at the word. If you can see it, I highlighted here, Reuven. And we're going to see some commentary in just a few minutes that plays with just the construction of this name, even perhaps breaking it into two pieces, Reuven. Reu from the verb lirot, to see, and vein, meaning son. Okay, ki amra, as she says, I chose this name, ki ra'a Adonai be'oni, ki ata ye'ehevani ishi. So she says, I chose this name Reuven because God ra'a be'oni, my literally poverty, but let's say, affliction or suffering. Ki ata ye'ehevani ishi. And now, because I've given birth to this child, my spouse, Jacob, who doesn't really have any regard for me, will love me. Because I've been able to do the one thing that women are supposed to do in this time of human history. And by the way, my sister's not able to, so things will be better. So and one of the commentaries that I want to try to look at with you is from Shai Held, and he lays out almost a hierarchy of these names, or actually, what's the opposite of a hierarchy? A lowerarchy. In other words, Reuven, when she says this, that God has seen her and that her husband is now going to turn to her with love, that is big. That's a big response to what's happened here. And so she's putting a name on this experience which describes what she imagines will come from this birth. but things don't exactly turn out that way. Okay, going on, verse 33. Vatahar od, she becomes pregnant again. Vateled ben, vatomer, ki shama Adonai, ki snua anochi, vaiten li gamze, vatikra shemo Shimon. So she has this second child. She says, I mean, it's really, to call it like it is, snua is hatred, to be hated. And yet I've been given this child, again, an affirmation of my worth as a person, my value to my husband. And so I'm going to call this child Shimon. God has heard me, Shema. So first God sees her, she thinks. Now God hears her. And these are all enormous blessings. And so she's still thinking, things must become better between me and this man who's not really interested in me other than my womb, which seems to be able to produce children. Okay, now verse 34, Vatahar od, she becomes pregnant again. Vateled bain, another son. So important to note, even that, before we know the name, the fact that she's able to produce sons is an extra special blessing because, of course, daughters are not as valuable. Vatomer ata hapam yilaveh ishi elai. Yilaveh gives us the name Levi. Sorry, my little cursor there is Levi, same word. So yilaveh, to be close to accompany, to join with. When Well, this is a strange analogy perhaps, but I think I can't help but think of when we accompany a coffin to its burial place. We use the same verb, to yilaveh. So she's saying that now with a third son, her husband is going to stick close to her. Yilaveh ishi elai, ki aladati lo shlosha banim. I mean, come on, I've given him 3 sons. Now he's certainly going to want to be close with me because look at all this good thing that's happening. Al kain karashemo Levi. And then finally, Vatahar od, get rid of that thing, Vateled bain, son number 4. Vatomer hapam odeh et Adonai. This time I will be thankful to God. Al kain karashemo Yehuda. And so I will call his name Yehuda, from that root, lehodot. Ta'amod miledet. And at this point, it says she stopped bearing. She stood by. Ta'amod, la'amod, to stand. So it's like she's on pause for the moment because we know that she's going to give birth to more coming up. But so far for this moment, this is what's happened. In a very problematic marriage triangle where the only value that the women can bring to the conversation is to be able to give birth, she has been quadruply blessed while her sister sits by, her sister, of course, who was so beloved by Jacob, but is not able to have children. Not yet. Rachel does get there eventually, but it's painful. Okay, so first, a piece from the Talmud, from Brachot 7b, and so striking. So let's just read it first. Again, the bolded part, in this case, the bolded part is what's actually in the language of the Talmud, and the unbolded is the editor helping us to fill in the missing parts. V'amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Bar Yochai. This is who is saying this. Miyom shebara hakadosh baruch hu et olamo. From the very beginning of creation, lo haya adam shehoda lehakadosh baruch hu. There was no one that was grateful to God. It's really remarkable. But if we went back and looked at the lineage from Adam Harishon all the way to Leah, not one of them says, "Thank you, God," according to this teaching. Ad Shabata Leah, until Leah comes along, V'hodato, and she gives thanks to God. And then it's just filling in the quote for us. The Talmud says, "Shene'emar hapam odeh et Adonai." This time, I will be thankful to God. And it fills it in for us here, and that's how she gets to that name, as we said before, Yehuda. So really giving Leah her due, at least in this one little teaching from the Talmud, saying that among all these other characters in the great unfolding of the Genesis, the book of Genesis, she alone is the one who gives thanks. And that's sort of explained as justification for why she continues to have success in giving birth. Okay. Now a little additional piece from the Talmud, and this is from what we call Aggadic language of Agadah, of story and myth, that is woven into some of the more halachic language that's in the Talmud. This is a quote from Brachot 7. There is an additional reason why Leah named her son Reuven. So here we're just focusing on that first child, Reuven. And the reason is not just that she said God saw her, as we read above, but also she foresaw, as this quote goes, by means of prophecy, the righteous deeds her son would perform in the future. And so she names him Reuven, a composite of the two words, Reu and Vain, as I was showing you before in the Hebrew. And the Midrash wants us to read that as, see the difference between my son and my father-in-law Yitzhak's son, Esav. And somehow putting Reuven and Esav next to each other, the Midrash plays with this. Even though Esav sold his birthright to Yaakov for the taking, even though, Yaakov, it was a kosher deal, so to speak. I don't know if you could say that, but it was handled, on the up and up, sort of. Reuven's birthright. You know what? I didn't finish typing in the rest of this. I apologize. Even though Esav sold his birthright to Yaakov for the blessing, it says in the quote, Esav continues to hate Yaakov. He never really surrenders. Reuven's birthright will also be taken from him and turned over to Yosef, but not only will he acquiesce, he will even come to Yosef's help and help save him from the pit. So the Midrash here wants us to see that in naming this first child Reuven, Leah even has a little bit of prophetic power, and she can see that this son is going to heal or to reverse the, gezerah from the negative decree from the time of the deception between Yaakov and Esav. Is this making sense so far? I think this is remarkable because once again, as we saw here, Leah, who we really mostly hear about Leah, that she was not loved, she was not very pretty, she was not very whatever, all we hear is that she had weak eyes. Here, the Talmud is saying she is the first one to give thanks in the way she names her last child. And in this second piece from Brachot 7, this midrashic commentary is saying she actually has a bit of prophetic power and can see that this first child is going to have an extremely important role in the future. And just to remind us, I went ahead and looked it up again myself just to make sure, because it's only been 50 some years of hearing these stories on my end. Reuven is the one that says to his brothers at the pit, when Joseph, comes to them, he says, let's not kill him. Let's just throw him in the pit. So Reuven is given some stature because of that. Okay. All right, I feel like I want to pause for a second because I can already feel myself getting overheated by all this remarkable stuff. So let's just pause and look at each other, feel much better just looking at all of you for a minute. Any thoughts? Any, just briefly, and then we'll go back to our more commentary. Shlomo, go ahead.
I love that we read this parasha every year close to Thanksgiving
Mm-hmm.
because I love Leah saying, Odeh Ladonai, I will give thanks to God. But
Yes.
I also, every year on my Facebook page at this time, say this, that we as Yehudim should know that our very name as a people is rooted in thankfulness.
Yes.
Yehuda, Yehudim, Odeh Ladonai.
Absolutely.
And I'm glad that, the first thing that every Jew has to say every day, the first word that a Jew has to say every day, as far as I know, is modeh, modeh ani,
Mm-hmm.
I am thankful. So here we are, people with our very name rooted in thankfulness. And the first thing we're supposed to say every day is modeh. Just blows me away.
Yes, agreed. Kol kavod. And if we can get to it, you'll see that Shai Held goes right where you are, Shlomo, and then he expands on it for us too. No, it's great. So hang on. So Audrey, Luther, Jerry, and then we'll go back to our texts.
Thank you. Just real quickly, when you mentioned about Leia and naming her children, I mean, I thought those names that she gave were just so sad. And I realized that she's the only one so far who explicitly, the Torah says, was not loved by her husband. When we're introduced, I mean, Abraham and Sarah, okay, whatever, but the other ones, it explicitly says, or there's a real affection between them. And Leia doesn't have that. So she kind of has to go overboard to put herself in a position of some stature with her husband, with her children, to seek something. So
Yep.
maybe in a way that's why she is doing what she's doing and saying that. She's trying to place
Great.
herself in some status.
Great. I mean, if you line her up with all the other women of Genesis and Exodus in particular, and I'll include Miriam there too, she's the only one who is, it says, it's really so dramatic. It says she's snua, like she's not just not, not beloved. She's really, really hated.
Yeah, it's
So,
it's unfortunate.
yeah. Thank you. Okay, Luther, Jerry.
Well, I was struck by the the truth that the names can be read multiple ways.
Mm-hmm.
And not only is Leia contemplating a relationship with the ineffable, but also her relationship with the very, very effable husband.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because, Reuben, God will see me, but maybe also Jacob will see me for who I really am.
Mm-hmm.
God has heard me, but maybe also Jacob will hear me.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time she gets to Levi, maybe Jacob will even come to love me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that, it just strikes me that there's this bargaining that she goes through
Yes.
that the names really illustrate.
Yep. Absolutely. Thank you. Jerry, go ahead. And then David and Nancy, can you hang on? And because I have some more things I'd like to share, and then we'll come right back to you. Go ahead, Jerry.
I just seen another almost a transformation of Leia, progression. So she's desperately looking for love, of course, but then finally, well, not finally, but at the fourth son, it's complete change, right? It's like forget Jacob and love. I'm just thanking God for this. So she's and maybe also teaching us. It's like just be thankful for the miracle of children. I mean, my God, what a miracle! And whether your husband loves you or not, it's important. But get beyond that maybe, or there's more, or and maybe and I get to which is what Thanksgiving is supposed to be about, I guess, right?
Yes, yes, yes. Beautiful, beautiful full circle with which Lomo started with. Excellent. Okay, Malka, we'll come back to you after. But so let's go on. You all you're already giving over some of the commentaries that are going to appear here now in front of us. And I want to acknowledge what Gil was writing in the chat about Leia is the one buried at Machpelah, not Rachel. Rachel is forever on the, you know, because she's buried on the road to Ephrat, she's forever stuck there weeping for her children. Okay. So I have two commentaries from Kedushat Levi, who is a Hasidic commentator. I don't want to read through the entire thing because they're actually both quite long, but I thought these were so interesting and so beautiful. And so I'm going to try to just get to the chestnuts here. Um, I wish we had time. My internet connection is unstable. Is everyone hearing me okay?
It just went out just for a second. It's better now.
Okay, yeah, I still see all of you. Okay.
No,
Uh-oh.
you're frozen.
I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just your video is frozen, but your audio is fine now.
All right.
And
I
your
don't.
sharing is still working.
Yeah, just getting rid of some of the extra chazarai that's here in my. Okay, are you still seeing my Kedushat
Yeah.
Levi? Okay. So I wanted to say a couple of quick reminders about kind of the set of glasses we have Hasidic text, because these Hasidic masters are coming from a different place, I feel, than many of the other classic commentators. They speak about the texts, about the ancestors in ways that are very personal, like they feel like it's their family. And it's ahistorical, of course. It's, if we're being very diligent about, um, I don't know what to call it, intellectual purity, we might roll our eyes a little bit at some of this writing and say, now, come on. And I think you have to suspend that a little bit if you want to see, I think, some of the beauty and value that's here. Okay. So one of the things that I appreciate so much in the way the Kedushat Levi talks about this episode in the Torah and about the matriarchs, you see in the English, they keep just referring to the matriarchs, just the word matriarchs, fine. But he refers to them as imotenu ha-tzidkionit. Tzidkoniot, that's the better way to say it. Imotenu hatzidkoniot, our righteous foremothers. It's an expression of appreciation, of love, of admiration that you don't see in the English. I'm just pointing that out. This, again, this is such a male-centric tradition. I feel like we have to grab the shevach for the praise and appreciation for our foremothers when we can. Okay. So then let's look here. By naming their children, the matriarchs provide us with a model lesson on how to serve God. Our matriarchs taught us how God, the creator of the universe, in spite of the thousands of concerns that keep God occupied around the clock, never neglects the problems of an individual creature of God's creations on earth. We have hashgacha pratit, what we call hashgacha pratit, which is this notion that, and again, I'm asking you to suspend your Reconstructionist theology just for a moment. The notion that there is a direct love connection between us and the creative force, and that we might benefit from that direct loving attention at certain moments in our lives. Okay, there, I tried to render that in a way that we could absorb it. God never neglects us and looks down in Kedushat Levi's language. Leia testifies that this creator took time out to notice that she was relatively hated by her husband, as a result of which God granted her children in spite of her being barren by nature. So Leia's in the Kedushat Levi, he's really lifting her up once again and saying, she says, God saw me. I feel seen. I don't, my husband, he doesn't notice me, but God actually notices. And then he goes on, the Kedushat Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev. The phrase, Vayiftach Rachma, that God opened her womb, in that verse makes it clear that she was barren. Why else would God have opened her womb, seeing that pregnancy is normally a natural process. Okay, and let's skip down here. The names given by their mothers to the founding tribes of the Jewish people retained their significance throughout our history. When Leah explained why she called her firstborn son Reuven, so he's just reaffirming some of the classic commentators here. Ra'a Adonai be'oni, adding a prayer, Ki ata ye'hevani ishi. Now my husband will love me. It's almost tragic to hear it here. You know, I have this child and now he'll love me. We know that that never comes to pass. This was an appeal for God's largesse to be drawn down for her benefit. And I just want you to see this, what he does here. When the letters or words of a tzaddik are translated into building blocks, avanim, they become transformed into avanim, which is translated into Aramaic in the equivalent, I'm pronouncing this avihen, fathers, as in founding fathers, as in ro'eh even Yisrael, and that's a quote from the end of Genesis. When the letters ascend heavenwards, they become not only cornerstones, but as is customary with sons, they eventually become fathers. I'm pronouncing this avihen. In Hebrew, the Holy Tongue, the word avanim is a combination of av and banim. The progression in Leah's insights is demonstrated when, at the birth of her fourth son, Yehudah, she no longer prays for her husband's love, but is full of gratitude. Hapam, Odet, I don't know. We're actually going to come back to do more with Yehudah, but I got so interested in this right here, this combination of Av and Banim, because of what the Midrash above was saying to us about the name Reuven. I'll just try to scroll back up here. This idea that Reuven is an expression of Leah's ability to see the past, the Av, and the future, the Ven, and make a tikkun out of it, to say this was a crazy thing that happened in my family, and I'm now going to send this child forth to set things right. I believe this son, this first son, who is the result of God's love for me, of God seeing me and noticing me and fulfilling my prayer, this child is going to have this healing power in the future. Okay, and now the second of the two Kedushat Levis. Bear with me just a second. Yeah, this one's a little bit shorter, and we'll try to go through it not too, tiresomely. These are the names of the tribes of Israel and Ruvain. So now he's commenting all the way into Exodus, but he's using this story from Parashat Vayetze as a way to explain what he wants to say about the names of the tribes. The reason why the names of the holy tribes are enumerated once more in Exodus, because they already had been enumerated at the end of Genesis, but they get, remember at the beginning of Exodus, it says these are the names of the tribes, is because their qualifications as being part of the 12 holy tribes is already alluded to in their names, as we shall see. Reuven was called by that name as his mother had proclaimed at his birth, God has seen my distress, Ra'a et oni, and now my husband will love me. When Leah bore Shimon, she gives thanks to God for listening to her prayer. When Levi was born, she expresses her conviction that God was, that from then on, her husband would milaveh ita, would accompany her, be with her, spend more time with her, catch a Netflix or something together. Both Shimon's name from the word shma, to hear, and Levi's from the word lilavot, to keep company with or to accompany, reflect the connection to God that Leah saw in these sons as accompanying them already from birth. When the reader will once more peruse that relevant chapter in Parashat Vayetze, She will see that all the names bore testimony to the mothers seeing in these sons being born a gift of God,
Hmm.
so that it was no more than natural that the sons, when growing up, would excel in their service to God, i.e., they would qualify for the title Kadosh.
Hmm.
He goes on to say a lot more here, which I'd rather not take the time with, but just so rich to see how this Hasidic commentator is saying it's in the bestowing of these names that all of these children of hers are lifted up for service to God in different ways in their lives. And you might say to me, "No, wait a minute, Shimon and Levi, really? Come on." And we'll have to save that for another week when we read the story of Dinah, I guess.
Mhm.
Um, okay, so now let's look at this. This is from Shai Held. I just want to note that this is from 5774. So what is that? 6 years ago? 8 years ago? Yeah, 8 years ago, I think is right. But and it's in his recent collection as well. So he goes through a lot of what we've been looking at and a lot of what you all had already started to say, noting this sort of progression that Leah seems to go through in the birth of these first four sons. She the first thing is Reuven, God has seen me and will Yehevani ishi, my husband will now love me. That doesn't work out so well. Shimon, God has heard me. Levi, God will now make my husband accompany me, spend more time with me. And he goes on. By this point, the reader is ready to cry for her. What ensues predictably is more of the same. Jacob is absent and Leah remains forsaken and forlorn. But now something seemingly inexplicable happens. Leah bears that fourth son, and we wait for yet another expression of her sadness and desolation. In other words, the lack of fulfillment of all these blessings she's sure are coming because of these babies, and perhaps of her wish that her husband will finally care for her, but something else entirely occurs, Shai Held says to us. She conceived again and bore a son. This time I will praise, I will give thanks, as Shlomo is reminding us, Odeh, or Odah. Therefore she named him Yehudah. What has happened here? How does a woman mired in such deep misery, languishing in such excruciating lovelessness, suddenly do a total about face and express gratitude rather than longing? She has somehow found the courage to accept that her life is not going to turn out as she had hoped. She has spent years aching for the love of her husband, repeatedly convincing herself that perhaps it is just around the corner. But now, suddenly, she sees that this constant yearning will only generate more fantasy, illusion, and the steadily mounting pain of a dream dashed time and time again. Something inside of her shifts. And rather than sinking in the sorrow of what she does not have, she is able to embrace the beauty and fullness of what she does. She is the mother of 4 sons, not just children, and they will beget an entire nation, the people of God's covenant.
Hmm.
And I think Luther and Shlomo, you were both emphasizing this importance and centrality of gratitude. Shai Held is right there with you. And he even stretches it more to say it's even more remarkable because it's gratitude in spite of disappointment. It's saying, I get it. My life is not going to turn out the way I had dreamed, the way I had hoped, even with these children who have come. And so all I have left now is to be grateful for what is. I'm going to skip a little bit here. I think his writing is just so moving. So let's just go to the end here. The name Leah gives her fourth son, Yehudah, meaning I will praise or I will express gratitude, becomes the name of the Jewish people, as Shlomo was saying before. Who is a Jew? One who discovers the possibility of gratitude even amidst heartbreak. That is why we are given the name that expresses Leah's courage and her achievements. A Jew is ideally a human being who, like Leah, can find her way to gratitude without having everything she wants or even needs. Disappointment need not preclude gratitude. and nor need gratitude crowd out the very real possibility of disappointment. Judaism does not ask us to choose one feeling or the other, but rather make space. Indeed, seeks to teach us to make space for the sheer complexity and contradictoriness of human experience. Who better than Leia to teach us that a broken heart can also have moments of profound fullness? Okay, so I'm going to stop the share again here and give a little more space for us to share with each other. And then I have a closing piece that I want to share with you. So just give us a moment to digest some of that. And we can't help but feel this speaking to all of us in the experiences of our own lives, which are for sure combinations of disappointment, of loss, and also hopefully many moments of gratitude. Okay, so before we were going to David, Kupfer, Malka, you were going to say something, and I think Nancy Solomon also, and then Steve Brody.
Well, it's very inspiring, to what you just read about the gratitude of Leia, from this place of hurt. But it makes me wonder, what do we make of the fact that we get through 29 chapters of Genesis before someone says thank you?
Mm-hmm. What do you make of that?
I don't know.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it is striking that, these great matriarchs and patriarchs, Abraham, here's the great Abraham, who is noted for his expansive love. He's the one associated with chesed, with loving kindness. He's not known for being grateful. And if this is such a central core part of our spiritual practice in Jewish tradition, to be grateful. Every week, Shabbat is based on being grateful for what is. So it is striking. And thank you for pointing that out again, David. Okay, going, I think now, Malka, were you still going to say something?
Yeah, well, I wanted to thank you, Rachel, for all this commentary and the translation of the sons, because I never really I never broke it down like that. And I know the Hebrew words, and it makes so much sense. And now whenever I see those names, I'm going to know really what they mean. And I'm just really grateful to you for this whole lesson. So that's what I wanted to say.
Okay, well, I'm grateful to be able to work on this with you as well. And yeah, I just want to, I'm just listening to you, Malka, and I'm just, thinking again about the Shai held piece where he sort of synthesizes all of it, or at least that's how I experienced it. It's interesting that Leia experiences these children as full-on blessings each time. She names them, as we've been saying. But then if you look at how their lives unfold, it's like you've got the bookends of goodness, Reuven and Yehuda. Reuven, who does, if you want to read it this way, have this important positive role in saving Joseph from being killed, at least, and sort of redeeming the negative birthright interaction of his. Okay, Reuven's relationship with Esav would be his great uncle, I guess, if I'm saying that correctly. And then you have Shimon and Levi in the center. Well, Shimon and Levi are known for being, hoodlums, for being perpetrators of horrific violence. And so it's those two in the middle don't, in a sense, fulfill the promise that she assigns to them in their names. But then it makes it even more poignant that we land with Yehuda at the end, because Yehuda is the one. I was having this conversation with my husband Jonathan. I was preparing for a different class that I was working on, and I was saying, well, we're about to look at the climax of the Joseph story, and Jonathan said to me, well, what is the climax of the Joseph story? And I said, it's when Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. And I'll see if Kevin, if you agree. Jonathan said, I don't agree. I think it's when Yehudah, Judah, steps forward to heal the rift in the family by offering himself in place of Benjamin. Anyway, that's getting way far afield to another parasha, but it's just highlighting Yehudah, who we meet as a baby this week, who's going to grow into a very important member of the family later on. So at least we have Reuven and Yehudah holding this little foursome together. Okay, Bob, I see you're ready to say something. Gil, you were waving your hand before. Were you going to say something?
After Bob.
After Bob. Okay, go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry, Bob. Bob and then Steve. I know Steve was waiting also. Go ahead, Bob.
My comment is that for the first time in hearing the story, I thought about this as an example of an arranged marriage. And the idea that, sometimes in arranged marriages, the participants are agreeable, sometimes they're not. And it's a very rich and complicated story because, sometimes love comes, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes there's an alliance of families, sometimes it's for children. And this shows a number of different possible outcomes of what's essentially an arranged marriage. I just never sort of thought about it that way before.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. It's most definitely an arranged marriage, and Lavan is in there doing all the arranging without the consent of either of these two partners. So thank you. So Steve and then Gil and Bob. Barkin.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I'm out in my car, pulled up on a stop. I apologize for joining late. I was getting my bike fixed. And so I missed the first half hour, but did I understand correctly that the term Jew from Judah has some definitional relationship to the word gratitude?
Yes. Yehudah is yes.
Yehudah means what?
Well, it's from this. They're from the same root of lehodot, to give thanks.
I see. And what does the scripture say when she gives the name Yehudah to this new baby?
This time I'm thankful. Hapam. She says hapam. This time I figured it out. I'm not gonna like have any grandiose expectations. I'm just gonna be thankful.
Yeah. I'll tell you what this whole scenario makes me think of. Yesterday while I was in my kayak, I was listening to the audio book, which I heartily recommend, by John Leyland. It's called Happiness is a Choice You Make.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the result of his year-long interviewing of 80 and 90 somethings, and what they found that sustained them at their age, and some of the quote unquote unexpected and remarkable things. And one that really struck me yesterday was this guy who in his 90s was burdened with all the things you would think you would be burdened with, but that every day he was struck by the gratitude of having another day and what he could accomplish, not what he couldn't do, but what he could do, and the relationships he had in his life. And it was, that's one of the takeaways the author says in the book. And I'm still in the midst of it, is how much the 6 or so individuals or couples he spoke to focused on the topic of gratitude that helped them share their wisdom and have joy at these later stages of life.
I was going to say toda rabbah, toda, from the same word, to be grateful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm just saying it comports with what Beth was sharing with us in the chat here about the practice of gratitude as an important tool for overall mental health. Okay, so from here, let's go to, I lost track of you. Gil and Bob Barkin?
I can wait.
Gil, are you going to say anything? Do you want to say something?
Just I was going back and looking at Jacob when he left his parents' house and he had the experience with the ladder,
Mm-hmm.
and he said God was in this place. And
Mm-hmm.
then he, instead of thanking God for the experience, he makes a conditional promise
Yes.
that if he comes back in one piece,
Right.
he'll do this, that, and the other.
Yes.
Jacob is not thankful, doesn't have a, well, I don't like Jacob. But anyway, it's just a difference in character
Yeah.
between him,
Totally.
between him and his wives, both, and Rachel too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's just, it's interesting to look at the comparison here, especially with what Leia says.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you for putting it that way. It's interesting. I don't always remember what we did last year, for whatever given parashat is, but luckily, thanks to good old Safaria, I have the source sheet that whatever we used from last time. So just wanted to remind myself. And last year we focused just on that passage. Where are you, Gil? Where he, it's there are conditions to this agreement, and that's where Jacob is coming from. He doesn't feel secure, so he says, "I'm willing, except you got to promise this and that." And it's really I really appreciate your now this year putting him right next to his spouses, or at least Leia, who gives very, very explicit voice to her gratitude and to the possibility of gratitude. So thank you. Okay, Bob, and then Shlomo will give you the last word here before we wrap up.
I just my Hebrew is not perfect, but the similarity between I think I raised it in the chat between the words for son, for build, and for difference
Mm-hmm.
are all, and it kind of it seemed to me that some of that was being raised in some of these commentaries, and it's the complexity of childhood. I mean, we consider childhood, bringing new life into the world a blessing, but it's difficult.
Mm.
And there's terrible conflict, but there's also building a new nation. So I mean, I think that the similarity of the words kind of gives the broad spectrum of how difficult and complex raising children is.
Kol hakavod, thank you. So I'm seeing it in the chat here. Bet, final nun with a yud inside it or not, depending on which word you're talking about, can be understood in those three ways. Like we say, bein kodesh lechol, the difference between light and dark, or excuse me, between the holy and the regular. I'm saying, ben, as in a child, a son in this case, and livnot is to build. And there's that famous commentary that says, don't read them as your builders, read them as your children. It goes back and forth in both directions, but to understand it in both those ways. So thank you, Bob. Okay, Shlomo, go ahead.
This is kind of a little different thing here, but I want to point out that Leah was the subject of deception when at the wedding, when he sees that he's married Leah instead of Rachel, and Jacob himself was the great deceiver when he came to get the blessing from Yitzchak. So the authors are kind of showing us he was a deceiver, he is deceived by Lavan, and of course later on he is deceived by all of his children, telling him Joseph has been killed by an animal and is gone.
Right.
So the writers are giving us a little bit of a circle there, which doesn't have to do necessarily what we've been talking about, but might be literarily interesting.
Yeah, it is. I'm sure it is. I mean, in a sense, she gets caught in the middle of all that. She's married to this person who never trusts, and perhaps, for good reason, but actually going back to what Gil was saying. Thank you. Okay, I want to end up with back where we started in the beginning of Genesis. And this is to leave the specific narrative of Leah and her children and to go back to the theme of naming, and specifically the theme of language in naming. And I just would like to show this to you. This is, sorry, somebody's got the doorbell going here. Okay, can we go through some of this in the Hebrew? Okay, so this is, remember we started, I'm not going to scroll way up because it'll make everyone nauseous, but we started with that little passage from Genesis 2 about Adam and giving names to all of the created beings. This is now David Kimchi, and I had to go back and remind myself of when he was writing. He is 12th century CE, so just hold that in your mind for a minute. 12th century CE. The names Adam gave to the animals were all in Hebrew, seeing that this is a language he spoke, of course, because Adam certainly spoke Hebrew. This is also the language in which God addressed him. God had called him Adam since he was a product of Adamah. Similarly, Adam called his wife Chava to reflect the fact that she was the mother of the human race, Em Kol Chai. Chava in turn called her son Cain, describing him as an acquisition, kinyan, of an ish, of an owning of something. I'm going to skip over these other examples he gives. He brings us to Noach. Zeh Yenachamenu. We get the name Noach here to bring comfort. The way these names reflect words in the Hebrew language closely related to such names all prove that Hebrew was the language spoken at that time. I'm not sure I can agree with him on that. I don't know about that. But just look at where he lands. It's just incredibly beautiful. The fact that we do not know the meaning of all the other names mentioned in the Torah for people of that era only proves our ignorance. Knowing neither enough Hebrew nor being endowed with the level of wisdom possessed by our forefathers, we will have to await the end of our exile to once again qualify for the command of Hebrew at the disposal of our ancestors. Well, I don't know if the ancestors had, such easy fluency with the Hebrew that we're thinking about. But when I read this, I thought, how remarkable to look into the mind for a moment of a medieval commentator who is appreciating the beauty and power of Hebrew language and saying, in a future time, it will be in our hands to use even more fully, even more richly, even more diversely. And here we are. The exile is over. And we have Hebrew to play with and to delight in and to challenge us. And I say that knowing that for so many people, Hebrew language is such a big barrier. It's so hard for so many people to understand what's going on. And they stop trying because it's hard for them to pass through. And I guess I feel so inspired by what Kimchi is saying here. And to say to all of you who are willing to dig in together week after week, with this beautiful, ancient, multifaceted, and challenging language, and to feel the special gift of living in the time that we do, when we are living in a time of this as a living language, not just the language of ancestry. Thank you all so much for tuning in and for giving us all a chance to get to know these passages in the ways that are hitting us right now. I want to remind you all, starting this Sunday, we have a wonderful opportunity to learn with Jerome Kapulski. Audrey, our amazing Jewish Studies chair, has put together a 3-part series with Jerome focused on the period we call Shivat Zion, the return of the exiled Israelites back to Jerusalem through the writings of Ezra and Nehemiah. It's an incredibly important part of Jewish history and a real window into how some of the legal practices we still are grappling with today got planted and founded. And I'm specifically thinking of intermarriage, for instance, which was introduced during that period, the prohibition against intermarriage. So tune in Sunday morning, 10 a.m.
10:30 to about 11:30-ish. The only thing that Jerome has asked us to do is look at the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, the 2 books. It's not that much reading. There's no additional reading, but he is just fabulous. Many of us have studied with him before, but I want to make sure that we give him a warm and fulsome Adat Shalom welcome.
Great.
One more thing too is that the Good to Know series is kicking off really soon. Martha Hare is the first teacher, followed up by, I believe, Lisa Landsman. And then we have David Cuny on deck and others. So please also, they're only going to be 1-hour sessions, Thursdays at 7:30 and then Sundays at 4. So if something is interesting to you, don't hesitate to come. You just click on the Zoom link. And if anyone in this community wants to teach something, please go ahead and sign up for it, or at least send us your idea and we can figure out if it will work. So thank you to David, who I know was on here, if he still is.
Yeah, he's here.
Okay, great. David, I look forward to your hearing more about your book. That's
Great.
all I have.
Thank you all so much. Everyone, keep well, enjoy this glorious day, and we'll see you next time.
Yasher Koach and Shabbat Shalom all.
Thank you.
Toda.
Rachel, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
It's Amy.
Hi.
Hi. When we say Leia was the first person to thank God, weren't the sacrifices on the altars a form of thanking God?
It's a great question, Amy. In fact, I wish you would have brought that up in when we were all together. You certainly could say that. I mean, those were ritual expressions of gratitude. The comment that she was the first one to thank God is that she's the first one to actually use language. So, but you're absolutely right, and I wouldn't have even picked it up that way until you said it. So, thank you.
It's true, she didn't go to the altar